What is going on, everybody? Ryan Leary, William Tincup here with the You Should Know podcast. Thank you all for listening and for watching today. We have a wonderful guest, Mason Farmani. Did I get that right?
Absolutely.
I got it right. All right,
Good
Mason
job.
Farmani, welcome into the call. We're gonna have a good call today about bosses. So
Mm,
William, you and I have spoken about this a lot. Actually, we had a call. We had an episode we did a couple weeks back, maybe a
yep.
month ago, and I kind of feel bad because I threw my old bosses under the table, and I don't think I've recovered from the trauma of
Well,
making them feel bad.
the question was, do you ever remember a moment where your boss made you feel where you felt belonged?
Hmm.
And so
Mm,
it was a tough question.
It was. It was.
It was a tough question. And
yeah.
you were like, I don't think I've ever felt belonged.
I felt, yeah, not even just at work. I just don't fucking
Right.
belong. Yeah, no,
No,
it put me.
it was a tough
Yeah,
question.
it was a question. Like I wanted to just answer the question, Mason, right? Eh, But I couldn't.
Yep.
No.
I'm like, huh? Like
It
it
was
made
funny
me
because
actually think.
he went through his jobs like from high school and he's
I'm
going through
like,
his jobs. You can see that he's going through his jobs. He's like, no, no,
it
no,
made for
no.
really crappy podcast because unless you're watching, you didn't hear a thing. Everyone just sat there in silence and they're waiting for me. I'm just like, I couldn't come up with an answer, and I
Ah,
felt awful, and I still think about that. But
No,
hey,
no,
look,
no.
there's
yeah.
good bosses, there's bad bosses. We're going to talk about how to deal with the bad boss. Is that what we're doing today? That's
Yeah, it's
the
difficult.
focus.
Yeah, difficult boss. And Mason's an expert. He consults with people on several things. He'll tell us a little bit more about his company, but he's i- he's this discussion around difficult bosses is tied to several other things.
Right.
It's not just that you have a difficult boss. We've all ran into difficult bosses, and we can define that in a lot of different ways because it can be subjective from person to person. But Mason, why don't you tell us a little bit about, because your company, your consulting company, you go into companies and basically help them not just with difficult bosses, but with other things.
Sure, sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to be on your show.
Sure.
It's
Mm.
my pleasure to be here. So, when I went to school, I studied industrial psychology.
IO.
And
Very
yeah,
nice.
so and this was years ago, without dating myself, I can just say that, this was years ago. But, it gave me a lens to look at things that, in the corporate world and also
Right.
in the personal world. And so for years and years, I owned companies, and I both through acquisitions and organic growth, I made them thriving companies. And
Right.
the last company that I owned and I sold was a global company with presence in Dubai and Paris and London and all of the
Oh, cool.
US. So I always managed people, and I owned and I operated them because I wanted to be involved, and I interviewed every single person that worked for us, which was a daunting task. But I believed
Mm.
that you can hire one person that does not
Could be.
belong, and it
Yeah.
upsets the apple cart, right? So then a few years ago, I decided that I wanted to really make an influence at a different level. So I sold those companies. And what I do now is I do corporate and personal coaching. So all the experiences that I've gained over the years, and all the education, everything else that I did along the way contributes to what I do with my clients. So among the many things I do, one of them is I walk into organizations that have issues, that have
Right.
they're either in transition, they're growing, or they're challenging. They have challenges. And one of them that is apropos to this conversation is when, especially at a high level, employees and founders or CEOs that are at odds with each other. And and these people were hired at some point because there was a thought that they all got along and they all worked together and everything was going to be beautiful. At least there was a dream of it,
Hmm.
right? Because we don't hire people thinking that, oh my God, they're going to be so terrible, I'm going to hire them.
They're going
So
to buck the culture and change. Yeah, yeah, no.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So then what happens that along the way something goes stray, something doesn't mesh anymore. And so what I do is I come into these organizations, and one of the first things that these people notice is that their productivity of everybody's gone down because they're dealing with so many emotional traumas and problems. They don't get along, whatever it is. I'm saying A and they hear B, and then they go after B, and then we're not aligned, right? So the first issue usually is in productivity and efficiency. But then the
Right.
most important one is that everybody's miserable,
Right.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
They go home and they have that misery follow them to their
Yeah.
personal life,
Oh yeah.
And
right?
that's I've seen just through the years. Not only does that make for a really unhappy workplace, one, it affects your home life
Oh yeah.
with your
Divorce.
spouse,
Yeah,
right? Like
yeah,
divorce and all that stuff. But coming back to work that next day or next week, or God forbid you take a vacation and you're complaining your whole vacation and you were just on a beach for 10 days and then you come back to work, you don't want to deal with the work stuff that has been happening and you disassociate more. That's
yeah,
what I see. I've been in that situation where you just,
Oh yeah.
like I can remember this is years ago at a staffing firm. Went on the honeymoon. Like I didn't like it when I was there. I went on my honeymoon. I came back. Said all my boss said was one thing. I said, "All right, I'm gone." Like
Yeah.
that was it.
Set you
yeah,
off.
yeah,
That was
yeah,
it. I
yeah,
didn't want to be there anymore, and I didn't even want to have a conversation. And that was just a staffing firm. At the executive level, that has a lot of repercussions of what
Oh,
could really
100%.
happen. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, totally. So yeah, I mean, I think you said something really good at the beginning of our talks about, when was it the last time that you belonged?
Hmm.
Right? I just
Yeah,
kind
I'm
of
still
go,
trying to figure that out. I'm feeling judged by both of you now. So
no, no,
thank
no,
you.
no.
No,
It's a
no,
great
not at all.
conversation, right? Because
No, I'm
It
kidding.
difficult
is.
bosses
Yeah.
or bad bosses, if we want to call it like kids would, they have that in common. They don't
That's
make you
Yeah.
right.
feel like you belong, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
And feeling belong, one of the things that contributes to feeling like you belong to the organization
Yeah.
is when your contributions and your opinions matter, right?
That's right.
Like
Right.
if your boss brings you in and says, gosh, I'm thinking about starting this new division and I want your opinion, right? And then really told you about it and
Hmm.
intently listened, right? Not that I'm just going to make you feel good and I'm not going to listen to you no matter what, but they really
Right.
Right.
listened and repeated what you're saying and then followed on some. It doesn't have to agree with everything you're saying,
Right.
right? Then you're like, oh my God, I feel a little ownership here. I feel like my
Yeah.
opinion matters. And as soon as you feel like you have a little bit of an ownership there, guess what? You
Hmm.
belong, right?
Right.
You feel like I belong here and this is where my opinion
It just
matters,
radiates.
right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then you
Yeah.
walk out of that meeting and you feel like you want to contribute even more. The best
Right.
bosses are the bosses that understand that and they actually make their employees more productive than anybody else.
Yep.
Yeah.
Now, so if we kind of like look at that model, right? The
Hmm.
bosses that are not doing that, the bosses that are, it usually comes from a certain amount of insecurity, right?
Right.
Because we got to look at
That's exactly
them,
right.
right? You got to look at them. What is happening in them that they're acting like this, right?
Right.
So there's certain insecurities, and then I always say that in the work environment, it's really helpful to put our somatic lenses to figure out what traumas people go through during work and what trauma has gone through their lives to be this way. And
Right.
even if you're working for someone, if you put on that lens to look at it and say empathetically, why is it that my boss is this way? Right?
Right.
And rather than just taking everything so personally that he doesn't like me, he doesn't have any good opinion of me, to just kind of like say, okay, so this is how he acts, this is how he likes to be treated, right? Rather than just kind of sticking with whatever it is that we want to always do. This is how my boss likes to be treated. And gosh, I wonder what has happened to him that he is like that. But not my job, but I will treat him the way he likes to be treated rather
Right.
than the way I want to be treated. Right?
Hmm.
So I got to tell you this
Yeah.
story, Mason, get your take. So in high school, I thought I wanted to be an industrial psychologist. So
You would have
there's a
done
lot.
well there.
So I reached out to a network of folks, and I meet a guy in Dallas that works for Xerox, Team Xerox. And I scheduled a time with him. I'm like 17, 18 years old. And I just said, hey, listen, I'm thinking about this path, and I'd love to come and meet you and just kind of learn about your journey, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Drive to downtown Dallas. He's about 30 minutes late to the appointment, and he's wearing sweats. So when he shows up, I'm like in a suit, like I'm my Easter clothes, I'm ready. And so I said, okay, just tell me, like, what do you do? Like, what's the bit? And he goes, here's the thing, William, what you have to learn about what we do now, it's about understanding employees and getting them to productivity, max productivity, the faster the better. He goes, and this is the 80s, so I'll date myself. He goes, we have employees that have cocaine problems, that have alcohol problems, that have marriage problems, they have gambling problems, they have whatever the problem is. My job is to find out what that is, take them out of work, go play golf, go play handball, whatever, go do something and start to work with them to find out and unpack that to then get them back to productivity. That's the job. And I can have fun with them because we're not going to sit in an office, because then it looks like it's a box, and people are going to clam up and it becomes different. I'm going to take them out and understand like what's going on in your life. And I fell in love with that concept, and I didn't do that obviously, but when I was watching Billions, the TV show on HBO, they have an inside psychologist.
Yes.
And it brought me right back to the I can't remember his name with Team Xerox, but I'm like, that's what she does. She does. Now she has an office,
Yeah.
okay, so it's a little bit different context, but she's about unpacking that person and getting them to their max productivity, whatever that may be. Define that as you wish. So begs the question, like when we deal with difficult bosses, and you've done an array of these with your consulting and in just your experiences in life, is it better internal or external to have someone, you know what I'm saying? You
Yeah,
know what I'm
yeah,
saying?
yeah,
Like,
yeah. In-house
is it,
position versus a consultant that comes in.
right?
So each
Yeah.
one
Yeah.
have their own advantages and disadvantages because I've done
Okay.
both, right? And
Okay.
I actually do both right now. There are companies that I'm that
Oh,
woman that
cool.
has that office
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
figures out, and I usually deal with the CEOs and the C-level people where they come in and their issues get played out, right?
Oh,
And
yeah.
then I got to
Yeah.
put them in their place so that they walk outside and they don't display that kind of a
That's
misbehavior
right.
to their employees.
Right.
And they have to be strong to be able to do that, right? Because they're the people that are,
They got to want it. They got to want it.
well,
Yeah.
so my position is if you've hired me, you want it,
Yeah.
right?
Good
If
point.
you write the
Right. If
check,
they're paying you to be there,
yeah,
yeah.
Fair
right?
enough.
Write the
Well,
check, you want
some
it.
people, Ryan, some people, especially
Check
in
a
the consulting
box.
world, they hire
To
you
say yes.
To check the
to say
box.
yes. Yeah. So it's not just the hiring. I mean, yes,
Yeah.
like I think that's definitely a litmus. You gotta get past there's a consulting fee and you're gonna spend money on this. Okay. But accepting the advice, like you're not getting the most out of your employees because you're
Yeah.
domineering.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
okay, let's unpack why you're domineering in a in
Yeah.
a in a conference room with people. Like, why is that?
Yeah.
They've got to want. They've got to want
Yeah,
that.
yeah. So the way I confront that usually is I say to them, look, you know that I could say yes to you and win your heart and be great with you, right? And you're gonna love me.
Extend the contract for another
Exactly.
2
Yeah.
years. Yes.
Yeah. And then I say, but it's not a good productive use of my resources and my time for you and your company. And you
Right.
have an obligation to your company not to have me say yes to
Right.
you. So,
I love that.
and there's been times where I say, look, if you really want to just hear yeses, I'm not the right person for you. I'm here
Yeah.
to just really tell you straight out the way it is. And if you don't appreciate it, then I'm just not the right person for you.
That tracks. That
Yeah.
tracks with me because it's been years, but basically, I would tell clients, prospects, before we got even into a client relationship, I'm gonna tell you your baby's ugly. You're either going to
That's your
accept
job.
that. That's
Yeah.
I see my
Yeah.
job as an external consultant as when your baby is not ugly, I'll of course say that as well, but I'm not going to play around and try to use 15 different words to say your baby's
No,
Yeah.
ugly.
it's ugly.
I'm just going to say your baby's ugly and like, well,
Yeah.
okay, now what do we need to do to kind
Yeah.
of go in a different direction,
Yeah.
make it better? And again, probably I'd say half and half of the CEOs I interacted with when I was doing that, half of them were attracted to that. It's like I need somebody in my life that would just
Yeah.
cut through all this stuff,
Yeah.
and half of them were like they didn't want
Yeah.
that.
So there's an art in communication, right? We all know that,
Right.
right? And each one of us would like to be communicated in a certain way. And each one of
Yep.
us also, if we're communicated in a different way, we don't hear everything you're saying to us. It's a design
Yeah.
of a human being, right?
Yeah. And
So,
it's very hard to see that as well.
uh-huh.
As
Oh,
yeah.
100%.
Totally.
Yeah. When you're not being communicated to
Exactly,
properly. Yeah.
right. And you
Because,
miss so much.
Mason,
Mm-hmm.
because you're an IO psychologist, do you think that's something to assess for? Because I'm thinking about the Berkman in particular. I took the Berkman 100 years ago, and it was with my firm. So everybody in the firm took it. Me and my business partner at the time, one of the things, because it broke everything down, like how you like it, how they like it, all that stuff. And one of the things that we learned about each other is I make decisions in
Yes.
seconds. Maybe not the right or wrong, but I process and make the decision. I've already moved on. And he was a really reflective, really empathetic, liked to do research, needed time to process, wanted time to process, not needed, and reflective, all of those things. So once we learned that, we read this in a report. We read this and we read it together. It's like, you know what? Here's what we're going to do. When I make a decision, when I come to a conclusion, I'm just going to tell you what it is. And then we'll wait 24 hours or 48 hours to talk about it. That'll give you enough time to do you. And I won't be stressed out because you're not going as like I am, and you won't be stressed out because I'm forcing you to make a decision quickly. Our relationship from that point, it
Yeah.
spiked because I understood how he liked his communication. He understood how I liked my communication too. So long-winded kind of a bit to understand your take on assessments and understanding kind of how people like things.
Yeah, totally. So there's a new actually assessment test that a lot of people take. It's called DISC, D-I-S-C. You've probably heard that.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
that's valuable.
yeah,
And it's valuable for you to
yep,
take it for you first, right? You got to know
right.
what are you made out of, right? What are your ingredients? Once you get to connect with who you really are, then what happens is that other people really become faster study, quicker study, right?
Right.
I can look at somebody, and so one of the things I always recommend to my clients, I also do a lot of executive coaching, and I do also, is when I get into the environment, the first few minutes I'm safe, right? I'm completely saying hello and all that, but I'm just really studying what's happening around me and who is doing what, how are they communicating, and during that first few minutes, I know from that point on how to communicate with each person, right?
Oh, wow.
And that's something that
Mm.
I think that our employees should learn, our employers for sure gotta learn, because
100%.
productivity
Yeah.
is really up to them. They're responsible, they're accountable for productivity. So they gotta know how their employees would like to be communicated to. One person is a social person. Like I've had employees that are totally type A. I've also had employees that they like to be in a dark room. They like to just be left alone. They are
Yep.
socially not capable of interacting.
Right.
But I'm like, okay, well, this person is great at what they do. By all means, I'm not going to invite them to every social setting. I'm going to invite them, but I'm not going to force them to come in to every social setting.
Right.
They're going to be uncomfortable, sweating the whole time. Why? So and they look at me every time like, oh my God, thank you so much for not making me come there. It's like, yeah,
That
Thank you.
anxiety level went
yeah, the
down.
anxiety goes
Yeah.
down, and guess what? He
So
feels belonged.
right,
Right.
right,
Right.
right,
Right.
right,
Ironically,
right,
right?
right.
For not
So
belonging.
That's
so
right.
how Mason, how do you handle and this is so I'm fascinated by this conversation and my mind's going everywhere. But how do you handle an executive
Yeah.
or what's the process I should say when an executive comes in and they don't believe in what you're talking about? For example, meditation,
Yes.
right? Maybe I'm not a big believer in meditation. So when someone says, let's go to a meditation retreat,
Yeah.
I'm like, you're a little weird.
I
How do
can't
how do
turn off
you,
my brain.
yeah, so
That's
like
the only reason I don't do meditation. Is I
meditation,
can't stop. I literally would have to take a Quaalude or something like that, or 300
this is where the
milligrams of.
conversation
No, no.
goes off.
I'd have to self-medicate. If I wanted to actually meditate, I'd have to do 300 milligrams of
Yes.
edibles,
Yes.
and then I believe I
Wow.
would get to a state, or maybe some shrooms, where I could ketamine, where I could actually focus
Turn the
on
noise off.
meditation,
Wow.
because I can't. Yeah, that's my brain. I can't. I
I
can't
wasn't
stop it.
thinking
I've
about
tried.
any of
No,
that.
but I took, because my ego, I had to then to think
Ah,
about myself. Like, I've been invited to meditation before. I've been invited to yoga camps and things like that, and I'm like,
Yeah. All right. So how do
I
you handle
can't
William,
do
who
that.
doesn't believe in the power
yeah.
of meditation? I've never done it, but how do you? An executive comes in, they're mandated to come see you, and they're just like they're looking at you and thinking
Yeah.
you're a quack. Like this isn't
Yeah.
real.
Yeah. So first of
How do you
all,
handle that? Because I can see that happening
totally.
all the
Yeah.
time.
So first of all,
Yeah.
I would say,
And I'm not calling you
Yeah.
a quack, but we'll put
No,
it
no,
in the
yeah,
no.
title.
yeah. So first of all, I think meditation is useful in a lot of different
Right.
cases and for a lot of people, right?
100%.
Uh,
You can't say 100%. Not after all that.
for a lot
No,
of people, not
it's it
everybody.
for a lot of people.
That was the key
He didn't
word
say
he was agreeing
he didn't
to.
say 100%.
Operative
He didn't
word.
say
Okay.
he did
Okay.
not
Yeah.
say
So
100%.
I would ask that executive, what is it that you're trying to accomplish, right? Are
Right.
you trying to accomplish, I don't know, more productivity through
Innovation. Yeah.
people bonding with each other? Are you trying to get
Mhm.
them to turn the noise off so they can be better at their work? Are you right? So you got to figure out what gap are we filling first, right? So I would ask
Right.
them that first. And then I would say, look, you understand that that exercise is really good for a lot of people, but not so good for a lot of other people. Find those activities that appeals to those other kinds of people that have the same outcome, but it's not sitting down and shutting the noise
Right.
off, right? Maybe if you brought those people, for example, and gave them canvases and painting and something to paint on these canvases, would have the same
Right.
effect. They're still disconnected from their mind, right? And they're actually
Right.
now doing something creative in their mind, which we know
Right.
once you turn that part of the brain on, the other analytical part of the brain gets less activity. So it's
That's right.
almost the same as meditation. Or bring them to the nature and see if they want to do, I don't know if they're really active people, see if they want to do jumping around or doing something, right?
Yeah.
So a good executive would be open to doing all of that. The problem is that he probably has benefited from meditation, and he thinks that everybody
Right.
will. So
Right.
Right.
But what's funny is Mason, in both those instances of communication, and also in this unlocking your brain to be more productive in whatever ways that is. Both of those comes down to, as you've already said,
yeah,
understanding the person, understanding the audience, right? So know thy audience, and understanding your employees, understanding executives, understanding the board, and understanding what makes them tick, and then tailor making something that the outcome is what's important. How you get to the outcome, not as
yeah,
important.
yeah, yeah,
Is
yeah.
that
You got to meet your audience where they are, right? It's like the
right?
same thing with public speaking, right? If you're a good public speaker, you'll spend the first few minutes trying to figure out where's everybody, what is the knowledge of everybody, right?
Yeah,
And it's just reading the room. You really,
yeah. Comics do this all the time.
Yeah.
They'll tell their first joke or two, and they'll be like, okay, so this
this
is the
is what I
audience.
got to
All right,
deal
Yeah.
good.
with. Yeah. Now, in organizations, we have tools available to us. You can make people take tests. I mean, I've
Yep.
always done that, right? It's like, when you first hire
Right.
people, by the way, you have the most leverage. Later on, making them take tests is a little more difficult than before you hire them,
So
right?
hard.
So
Mhm.
you can do a lot of things as an employer and also as an employee right before you get hired. That's where both sides have the most leverage. So as an employer,
Right.
you can have them take tests. You spend $100 up front, $150 up front, and a lot of good assessment tests that they're there. And you like look at things and you just figure out, my God, this is really not even a good fit for the organization. Why do I want to bring
Right.
somebody like that here?
Right.
Uh, One of the things that's worth mentioning right now is, uh, you know, cultures of organizations always gets trickled down from the top, right? So
Yep.
if you
Yeah.
run into or if you go to an organization that's like 500 employees and you walk in and the receptionist is straightforward, a little on the rude side, I always say,
Right.
God, you got to know
Right.
that the CEO on top is pretty much similar to this
100%.
person,
It's
right?
that way.
Because it's what's accepted. You are what you are. What you accept. And again, the top has set that forth on what's willing or what they're willing to accept and not accept. And culture, so many people don't understand culture in general, but they don't understand the hourglass of culture, that there's new inputs and then there's things that are going out of culture. That's all still directed by the
Yeah,
top.
and that's
And
true. And people hire people that are like them, right?
100%.
So, I mean, you walk
100%.
into want to buy a car, you're going to gravitate towards the salesperson that are like you, right? So,
Sorry.
Yeah.
It's
people
like me
always
bias.
hire people
Yeah.
like them, and then those people hire other people that are like them, right?
Right.
Homogenous
It just
environment at
goes
one
Yeah.
down.
point. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you,
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you the
yes,
upside of that.
totally.
Of course, y'all will both hate this, but
Probably.
the The upside of that is that everything's easier because they all go to the same country club. They all were in the same school. They're all in the same fraternity. They're all middle-aged white guys. There's no
Yeah.
conflict.
It's easier until it's not, and then it
You
hits the
got it.
fan, and then it just
You got it.
tanks. It just
I'm not
tanks.
making a
There's no
business.
safety net. I see
I'm
how
not
you
making.
build companies. I mean, I'm just.
I'm not making a business case for it. Here's how I got there. I looked at a Silicon Valley VC firm. This is 10 years ago, and I went to the partners, whatever team part, and it was all the same guy. They had differences in their haircuts and eye color, and some other things,
Yeah.
but it was all the same guy. And immediately I got angry, and then a part of me then get, you know what? That's got to be very easy. Like that, the whole bit's got to be easy. They have to agree a lot.
But that's also the problem,
You know what
right?
I mean?
You're looking at the
I
positive
know, I
side, which is
know, I
great. I
know.
appreciate that. But there's also a
Yeah,
problem.
you
It's the
justifying the
same
wrong. Yeah,
hiring somebody who's a yes
yeah,
person, right? Where where is the
Yes,
yeah,
right.
diversity in that? Where, and by diversity I
yeah,
Well,
mean
that's
thought diversity, right? That I mean, not
right,
going.
right, right.
So yeah,
yeah,
where's the
yeah.
I, I think you have to have conflict to have innovation. There's got to be some
Mhm.
level of I agree with you, I hear you, but I think this, and then there's some
yeah? I
type of
can
resolution.
brainstorm.
I think that
That's not a brain
yeah,
storm.
can lead.
That's a
Yeah,
brain breeze.
yeah.
Yeah. Actually, we should use that. I like that. That
100%.
I just
yeah,
That's
came
in the
up with
title. That's in
that.
the
yeah.
title.
Yeah.
Oh,
Brain
that's
breeze.
greatness.
It's the brain breeze with Mason.
So, Ryan, do you have a question? Because I have one.
I've got a lot of questions, but I'll let you go first.
Okay, so what's your take on hiring mavericks? So, and I'm thinking of in our industry, there's a wonderful man named Jerry Crispin. And 100 years ago, he was hired at Johnson & Johnson. And his boss basically said, go break
Mhm.
shit. I'll protect you. Go bounce around, find out what's not being done well. And it was all in recruiting. So it was all in talent acquisition and pre-hire and all that stuff. And he said, go break stuff. And he protected him. So he hired a maverick. He knew he was a maverick. It was a known quantity, knew what he was getting, but he protected him. And so is there, first of all, in your work, do you see people seek out mavericks in that sense? And second part of that is there any relationship between a person that is a maverick, and we can
Mhm.
define that a little bit more, and a difficult boss? Like, I have this bit because you got a PhD.
Oh,
I think what
UCLA.
college did you go to? Yeah. And IO psychology, Ryan, everything comes down to what school you went to and what professors were on your
I
thesis
don't know if there's
and
any value
dissertation
to that,
committee.
but okay.
So, well, I've
Good, we're
spoken
on the same page, Mason.
I've spoken PSYOP 3 times, and in every case, there's clusters of school. Like there's the University of Tulsa, there's UCLA. Like
All right,
yes,
go ahead. Go ahead.
maybe not to the level I'm saying. So, is there any? It's like when I think of teachers, professors in particular. In my experience, there were professors that were great teachers, and there were professors that were great researchers. And I said all the time when I was in college, I always said, why don't you just split these two? Let the researchers go research. Let the teachers go teach. Why are we forcing one to do the other? So again, I think about those renegades or those mavericks, and I think to myself, do you see in your work and in your experiences, do you see people seek those folks out? And if so, is there any relationship whatsoever between those folks and difficult bosses?
So I think let me, since we haven't put a lot of parameters around Mavericks, let me see if I understand that
Right.
correctly. So you're talking about people that would come in and cause breakdowns so they can cause
100%.
breakthroughs, right?
That's exactly right. I myself am one of those people in the sense of I don't believe in
Yeah,
rules. I understand the
yeah. All
rules.
right.
I just don't
So
believe in them.
I have to say it depends on, yeah. Well, you have to understand them in order to break through.
So,
I'm
so
also
his
so
his re-
involved.
his his response there was just like, yeah,
He,
okay, we need a longer session here. Here's my
Yeah.
hourly rate.
Yeah.
I know all about you. Yep, yep,
Uh,
yep, yep.
We've got
yeah,
plenty of
I
you
didn't
in the
think I was
corporate
that
world.
obvious, but okay.
But breakthrough, you got to the place, you got to whether or not it's renegade or maverick, like the term
Break down the
is.
Yeah.
breakthrough.
I
So it
like
always
that.
comes
I think
down
that's
to
right.
the breakthrough, right? Yeah. So I
Right,
would say that the organizations that are looking for that, they're either a chaotic organization, somebody who is always
right,
believing that we got to just continuously break down to breakthrough, or there's a
right.
organization that
It's
is actually dealing with challenges, right? They're like, we've been
right.
around, we've been
Maybe they're stagnant.
stagnant, we're like our organization is stagnant, and there's no such thing as stagnant organization. If you're staying stagnant, you're going down, right? There is water doesn't stay
Hmm.
still. So either it's going to get
Right,
rotten or it's going to change. So, so
right,
if it's the first one, then they really need help, right? If it's a chaos that is going to be,
right.
it's never going to survive.
You how I've seen that play out, Mason, is they didn't say
Right.
chaos, they said change. And so they were
Yeah.
addicted to change. Like that nothing could ever stand still because they were addicted to, okay, we need to innovate. We need to
Yeah.
change. And they even said it like that. We need to change. We need to change this process with customers. We need to change this. And I came away from that believing that they were just addicted to change for change's sake. But I think your chaos word is a little bit better,
Yeah,
more
because
apropos.
once you mix those two, change and chaos, there's an issue, right? Because yes,
Yeah,
change has been known to be good for human brain, right? If you keep doing the same thing, you're not growing brain
Hmm.
cells, right? You're
right,
right.
right, right.
So if you're doing ceremonial stuff every single day, well, ceremonial stuff is good for calmness and the regulation of the system, but then you need to have certain amount of change in order for you to stay excited about life, right? So it's the same thing with work, right? Chaos is very different from change. Staying on
Right,
top of the changes in your industry, for example, or what is a new way, what is a disruptive way to create better, to create more. It's again goes back to
Right.
output, right? If you're doing it because you want to have
So,
more of an output, then you got to look
right.
back and say, well, so what changes helps? Not to just do it to do it.
Hmm. Yeah.
so how are you defining
Hmm.
chaos in this in this way? So are you defining chaos? And when you say chaos, I'm thinking the fuckery of leadership. Like
Mm.
no one can make a decision. If they make a decision, they're arguing. It's very noticeable to the employee population.
So I took it, Ryan, that there's no North Star, that they have no either ethical code or moral code, but there's no true north. So similar to what you're saying, but it's like they've lost their way and they don't have a compass. That's what I think to
So
me
how do you
when
mediate the two of us on this? Because
yeah. Well, what is chaos? Hell, I know you're the expert. We're just saying when you said
Yeah.
chaos, that's what I heard.
yeah.
They
Well,
don't
let
they
me.
don't have a compass, and Ryan heard something
I don't want
completely
to. This
different.
is it's an interview, but I don't want to turn it into a therapy session. But but let's do it,
No,
right?
no, no,
Let's
no,
Oh
try.
no. You're
no,
good.
Okay.
You're
go
good.
for it.
So
Let's do it. Hey, look, this is free therapy. I'm
yeah.
all in.
So when
Just don't
was
send this an invoice.
to Ryan? Let's start with you. So when was the last time you were in a situation where you felt it was chaotic?
Probably the very
All
recently,
right.
like last year or
Give
so.
me the ingredients of what made it chaotic.
I think um, probably lack of decision making.
Okay.
decision making,
Yeah.
and communication.
Yeah.
Trying not to
So you
talk.
got two of them right, right? I mean, and there's no wrong because that was yours,
Hmm.
right? Those are the ingredients that you were
Right,
That's right.
experiencing.
right,
So there's no right or wrong, right? So there is no decision
right,
making, and there is no communication. So there's either lack of communication or
right.
maybe even possibly poor communication, you would just say, where people are communicating, but
Sure,
they're
yeah.
not
Mhm.
hitting it on the head, right? Which
Right.
I say that the reality of the people that were involved were not aligned, right?
Yeah,
Right.
They came
got
from
it.
different
That
realities.
tracks.
I look at this and I call it a
Yeah.
clock. You call it watch. And you can't see that it's
Right.
the same thing, right? So the
Right.
reality changes. When
That
reality
tracks. That
changes,
tracks for me.
the communication suffers because we're not communicating anymore because we're just looking at it.
Sure.
And then
Yeah.
when communication changes, the affinity changes, which means I
Right.
don't really like you because you can't see my way. Right? I mean, you look
Right.
at any
Right. Right.
relationships,
Right.
those three things, right,
Same
happen.
thing.
It's
Yeah.
with your partners, with work, every time the reality changes, what happens is the communication suffers and the affinity goes out. When the affinity goes out the door, now I have made up my
Yeah.
mind that you don't like me and I don't like you. And then it's really
Right.
fallen
Ego.
apart, right? Everything is falling apart.
Right. Right.
Right.
One of the biggest scholars of our time has passed away. I don't know if you guys are familiar with him. Wayne Dyer uh, said that
Know the name.
when you
Yeah.
change the way you look at things, what you look at changes. I'm going to say that again.
Oh yeah.
When
Cool.
you change the way you look at things, what you look at changes,
Hmm.
right? So
That's the title of
if
the show.
you are
Yeah.
able to actually look at this watch clock thing and then as an expert bring everybody in alignment, that they look at it and they say, wow, now I see. When you said watch, you meant clock. And when I said clock, you meant watch, right? So
Right.
We're saying the same thing. We're
exactly,
just using different
right?
Yeah.
words.
It's a
And
timepiece.
I teach this concept
Genius.
in political arenas. I teach it in
Yeah. Yeah.
family and emotional healing. You know, it's like, okay, so this happened to you, but this is how you looked at it as a 7-year-old. Now, as a
Right. Right.
30-year-old, let's look at that same incident and see if we can replace, and that's where neuroplasticity and neuroscience comes, right?
Hmm.
See if we can
Right.
change
Right.
the way we looked at it. The 4-year-old made a decision about the way he or she saw it, and that decision has been running the rest of your life. But let's, as a 30-year-old, look at it, see what you see today. And then the decision
Right.
changes. And as the decision changes, there's neurons that are starting to fire together
Hmm.
differently. And then when they fire together, they wire together. You do it long enough, there's a new network created. And when that new network's created, that becomes your behavior, right? So it's the same exact thing, right? The reality when it changes. And when you're able to look at it differently, then all of a sudden that issue becomes something different. And then you get in
Right.
alignment. Sometimes you just need a good guide to bring you along to have you see what it is that is, because the guide, as an observer, should really be able to
Right.
see what the conflict is.
Well, in consulting, we used to say the term the forest of the trees. So when you're
Yes.
in it, you're so close to the tree, you can't see the forest. So an outside, I mean, I was a horrible consultant, but when I was consulting, I would tell people about the forest, and by and large, it was like, yeah, we've talked about that before. Like it was, they knew about it, but they just couldn't
Yeah,
see it
yeah,
because they were too close
yeah,
to it. So I've one last question. I know Ryan does too. So you obviously believe that difficult managers can change. I struggle with that concept.
yeah.
If they don't want to change, it's like all the other things that are in society. If they don't want to change, I don't think
No.
you can change them. It's like at 36, I realize giving people unsolicited advice is
Oh,
a waste of my time.
absolutely.
At 36, I finally decided at
You
36.
excelled at that.
No, I said no.
Just be
No,
very, very clear with this one.
fair enough. But
Yeah.
I come to that realization, Ryan, and it took me a
By the
while.
way,
It took me a
you were
little while. I'm
giving
a slow
Yeah,
away
learner,
value,
but
I
I
and
came.
nobody had value for what you were giving away.
Yeah.
yeah, that's it.
So I think what you should do, blah blah blah. Okay, and I finally said, okay, I'm going to wait when they ask me, hey William, what do you think? Then I'm going to preface it. Okay, you sure you want to hear what comes next? And
Yes.
then give them what I think, right? So I've learned that, and I've also learned, like dealing with
Mm.
addiction, people that are addicts, that it's very similar. If they're not ready to stop drinking
They're not going to stop.
or whatever, it's a waste of time until they decide. Now, I'm thinking about that and thinking about difficult bosses or horrible bosses and thinking, if they don't want to change, if they've not gotten to the place where they want to change, what
Yeah,
what
yeah.
can we
Well,
do?
great question, right? Because I kind of insinuated this at the very beginning when you go to an organization and you see a way the receptionist act a certain way, right? Then you
Right,
know that this organization actually nurtures this behavior, right? So you can have a
right,
difficult
right,
boss that seems difficult to you, but in that culture, they thrive, right? Because their boss is that way,
right.
right? And the expectation to,
That's
if
right.
there's a kind boss, and then you've got a tyrant running the organization, well, they're going to be at odds with each other, right? Well, he was probably not going to get hired to begin with, but right. So you got to know
Right,
that that's the culture of this organization. And if you are a highly sensitive person, which is actually a personality type, you probably know, then you're going to be
right.
miserable in that organization, right? So you got to keep your
Yeah,
eyes open at
yeah,
the very, very beginning of where, before you even start to interview. If that if the reception is kind
yeah.
and offers you water and tea and brings you in and what else do you need? And you're like, wow, yeah, that's an organization that's a good fit for me. And if you're the kind of person that
Yeah.
Yeah,
you yourself know that I'm a mean person and blah blah blah, then you're like, well, this is like, dude,
She's way too nice
this is
for
way
me.
too nice of an organization for me. I'm going to be like, ugh.
right.
So
Yeah, yeah,
Wall
yeah,
Street has
exactly, you
Wall
go to
Street has a
another one.
job for you. You're good.
yeah.
Don't worry about it.
I think the challenge with that is
Mm.
oftentimes people looking for a job are desperate for a job.
Yeah,
And so if they get the interview and the call
say
back and
whatever,
they go through it,
accept whatever.
they
Yeah,
accept whatever
Survival.
comes through. But Mason, the final question, yeah, the final question that I wanted to ask this earlier, but I want to ask it now, and it kind of ties in. How many, just off the top of your head, approximate, of the executives that you work with in this way cannot come to a resolution, but they come to the understanding that this is not the organization for me or the
Yeah.
position. I need to remove
Yeah.
myself
Yeah.
from this role. And is that a success for you at
Yeah.
that point as well?
Look, I think that
it's a
the
great question.
ultimate goal of us as a human being when we come to this earth is to have joy. I think that's the ultimate,
Right,
right? And if your work is taking that away from you and there's nothing you need to be accountable for, right? And I emphasize on that, right?
Right.
Because there's some hard situations that are there for us to heal something and grow. That's our accountability, right?
Right.
If you have used up your
Right.
opportunity, and by the way, same with marriage, right? I'm one of the few coaches that when I work with couples, I say, this is not working. You guys, I'm going to help you get separated. And they're no, my colleagues are like, you are
Yeah.
terrible. You should not coach anymore. So like, okay,
Wait, you're paying to help us. I am. Trust there's no help for you. You're good.
I have the divorce agreement right here.
You get
So
the
all we need,
house, you get the
yeah,
car.
I already worked it
Bye.
out. Based on your personality, I know
yeah.
what you want.
So
All right, we got
the
it all
same
worked
thing
out.
with
Yeah.
work, right?
Sign.
And once you know that your accountability is not at play here, right? And it's just the wrong place. And I've had a lot of people that I worked through this with. And then what I do is I actually work with them
Right.
on how to transition out. Because just like how
Yep.
you do the romance thing to get a job, there's certain ingredients that you have to have in place in order to get out of a job. And you don't want to burn your bridges. You want to make sure that you've done the right thing. If there is some mistreatment that needs reporting, that's got to be done correctly and done. And then also you got to play your cards right. You got to go to the market. You got to do your interviews.
Right.
You got to have something in the background before you start rocking the boat here. And then
But it's ultimately to help them find that
and then you
place of
got to
joy.
know what you learned,
So it's
right?
in their
Same
best interest.
relationships. When you get out of a relationship,
Right.
and job is a relationship, right? You got to know what lessons you learned from this job. And then you got to figure out what it is that you
Right.
want in your professional life. Where is it that your most contribution is going to be playing out? And once you figure that out, then whether you call it manifestation, whether you call it clarity, whatever it is you want to call it, then you can actually start looking for jobs that you want. But more importantly, as you go to interviews, like, that's not the one I want. It doesn't matter. It may take me 2 more weeks to interview, but yes.
You know what this reminds me of, Mason, is why the number of second marriages has a higher divorce rate.
Yeah.
Because they bring the baggage from the first marriage
You
into the
haven't
second
healed.
marriage.
Yeah.
Brother, we could talk to you all.
Yeah.
No, we haven't healed.
Yeah.
We could talk to you forever. Thank you so much
Our
for
pleasure.
carving out time for us in the audience and schooling us on a bunch of different things. So I know Ryan and I are really going to enjoy this because you just got us to think.